right, very good. You've heard from both candidates. We'll begin with your questions, and we've got a few. Remember, after you have that question written on the card, hold it in the air, and our volunteers will be around to collect that. Here's the first one, and Tony Tangwell, you'll be the first to respond to this since Tanya Storr started off with the opening comments. As you consider the Nebraska Legislature, what would you say are the two most important issues facing Nebraskans, especially in District 43?
The two most important issues facing District 43 are the ability to own anything. Are we going to continue to be slaves for the rest of our lives, or after 5 and 6 generations, are we ever going to own our ranch, our businesses, our real estate? That's a huge issue, whether we own anything. Our current tax system in this state, with property taxes, it will keep you from ever owning anything. You will never develop any wealth. The second great issue in our legislature is what are we doing with our children in our school system? I wouldn't take my truck to a mechanic who told me to put gasoline in a diesel engine. You know, we're paying for teachers, we're paying for curriculum that are telling our students things that are just categorically wrong and immoral. These are the two great issues that face us right now, and they need to be dealt with because both of them determine the legacy that we're going to leave to our children.
I don't know if we need to reset the clock. All right.
Yeah. Same question.
Yeah, repeat the question again.
Sure. As you consider the Nebraska Legislature, what would you say are the two most important issues facing Nebraskans, especially in the 43rd District?
Well, the two most important issues facing Nebraskans, especially in the 43rd District, I think top of the list is absolutely tax reform. Tax reform is affecting so many other aspects of our life. So our current tax system, and the reason we're in a property tax problem, is because of our school funding formula called TIOSA. That was passed in 1990. It's Tax Equalization and Education Opportunities Act. The craziness is it did not equalize, it put us in an unequalized position, and it took more opportunities away from our children. So we have got to make meaningful reforms. In those reforms, we have got to maintain a level of local control, because what the legislature did to us through TIOSA was take away, starve us out when they adjusted that formula every year to the point that we were fully funding our schools. So we need meaningful tax reform, we need to have local control, and keep those decisions closely tied to the taxpayers.
All right, very good. Tanya Storr, we will stay with you for this question. If you were to change how schools, specifically rural schools, are funded, what would you propose?
So I've studied this TIOSA formula, which is a fancy acronym for several years now. And again, it was designed for equalization of opportunity. It has done just the opposite. Every student in the state of Nebraska needs to have the same support for school education across the board. It doesn't matter if they live in Chadron or in Whitman or in Lincoln. One of those issues that I've proposed in the past is the way that formula is set up. It looks at valuation of your district. Puts a heavy burden on agriculture. So taking that formula and taking residential values only for the purpose of the formula to really equalize that distribution of funds out, I think, is a fair approach from the state, so every student is treated equally. Our students deserve the same level of support that the students in Lincoln and Omaha are getting.
Thank you. Tony Tangwell, same question. If you were to change how schools, specifically rural schools, are funded, what would you propose?
I would propose the epic tax option. I would also propose the idea that we need to take a hard look at the product that we're turning out in our schools. These kids come into life, come into the world, they come in brilliant, they come in motivated, and it would seem that what we are doing is that we are curbing all of that. And I'd like to see schools. I'd like to see schools that are doing an excellent job be rewarded for that. We need to have incentives There's no other station in life where performance does not dictate, you know, how much we get paid. The epic tax option is to be looked at. It would make sure that we're, like she said, we're on an even playing field with schools all across the state. And really we need to encourage our teachers. We need to do a good job raising these kids. So, but I think the epic tax option does a good job for that. It levels it out just like she wants to level it out. It just would do it a slightly different way.
We will stay with Tody Tangwall for this question as well. Question number 3 on the night. What is your opinion on our current tax structure, and what changes would you advocate for if elected?
We're all concerned about taxes, aren't we? Because that's the most important thing to us, because it dictates our wealth and it dictates our security. And like I said, I'm an epic tax guy, and if you sit there and say, well, I'm not, and I can appreciate that, but I would ask you to spend as much time studying the epic tax option as you do the bull sale calendar or the bull sale catalog when you go to choose your bulls, and spend time studying it out. I'd also like to do a few things in our tax structure. If we can't get the epic tax passed, I'd like to do some things that would encourage the good people that we need in our state to be here. We've got a shortage of nurses and things like that. Senator Brewer has a bill that's talking about exempting the income that people get from the National Guard from state income tax. There's a lot of entities and a lot of parts of our society in this state that we could reward in a tax structure to lower their taxes to keep these good people in our communities, these young people. The taxes that we pay is the lowest hanging fruit as far as incentives to keep people in town. It's the easiest thing that we can deal with as far as creating wealth for ourselves.
And that's time. Would you like me to repeat the question? Okay, for Tanya Storer. What is your opinion on our current tax structure, and what changes would you advocate for if elected?
Certainly. So we've heard a lot in the past about the three-legged stool, and that gives us a really good visual. We have income, sales, and property. And over the last several years, that stool has fell over. So property tax leg has gotten much longer than the sales and income, specifically as it relates to school funding. So we need to continue to work to equalize those three inputs out, so we're not unfairly burdening one industry as agriculture is being unfairly burdened in the current property tax system. But the other factor in property in tax reform across the board, and it's not popular, but it's reducing spending. Our government is bloated to the point, and it's all government knows how to do is to grow. So we have to have good, disciplined fiscal responsibility in order to reduce spending and rein in our out-of-control government, quite frankly. Having watched what happened with the TIOSA formula again, and having sat on that Class 1 board 30 years ago, I firmly believe that the closer the tax decisions and the levying abilities are tied to the taxpayer, the more accountability you have. That's how our founding fathers envisioned it to work. So local government is the most efficient and the most responsible. So there's a huge risk in turning all of that collection and distribution over to the state and entrusting they're going to send back to us what we need. They've starved us out with TIOSA. They will do it if given the opportunity again.
Okay, we will stay with Tanya Storer for this question. What is the difference between a politician and a statesman?
This is a great question. Since I started just being interested years ago, it was just that very issue that I would say we have a lack of statesmen in Nebraska. When you're elected to the state legislature, you're elected certainly to represent your district because you understand your district's needs the best. And so yes, you have to be an advocate. I will be an advocate for the 43rd district. We are unique and we do have unique needs. That being said, you have to have a bigger picture in mind as well, because if the state of Nebraska is not doing well, the 43rd district's not doing well either. So having a leadership style that is willing to sit down and listen to other senators from other districts and come up with meaningful solutions that are going to benefit the state as a whole, because when we all do well together, right? So a politician is just going to do what they need to do to get elected. I see it over and over again. And you know what I see most often, what politicians do to get elected, is they do nothing. That's the best way to get reelected. Just do nothing, and you won't get any criticism. I was once told that a strong leader is going to make tough decisions, and when you make tough decisions, you probably make the headlines. And so I'm willing, I have a history of making tough decisions, and I will go to Lincoln and make tough decisions on your behalf.
I'll remind both candidates to get the mics up so everybody in the crowd can hear you. What is the difference between a politician and a statesman? Tony Tangwell.
A statesman wants to stay at home and do his business. George Washington was a statesman. He wanted to serve his country, but he didn't think that was the final thing in his life, and it wasn't his greatest ambition. Statesmen have to be found from the fields and the barns and the calving lots, and they've got to be asked, because they don't crave a position of authority. They care most about the state and the country. A statesman realizes that when he's done his job, the most important thing is for him to go home and be a citizen again. A statesman is not looking for the next elected office above the elected office that he's just held. Politicians are like prairie dogs. They get fat on your grass, they make a lot of noise, they make a mess, and they're always protected by their bureaucratic friends. I'm going to be a statesman and not a politician.
We'll stay with Tony Tangwell for this question. How do you plan to help shape rural Nebraska economic development? Some examples that we got from the crowd. We need small-town grocery stores, housing, daycare, and people to facilitate programs and grants.
Economic development. Any economy in the world has always been developed on the natural resources in its general vicinity. My wife is from West Virginia. There's one thing that West Virginians do better than anybody else in the world, and that's dig coal. And so that develops their economy. In the 43rd District, there's some things that we do better than anybody else in the country, and for that matter in the world. We raise cattle, we raise some corn, we raise, livestock. We are farmers and ranchers. If we want to develop an economy in the 43rd District, we do our dead level best to allow our people on the land to win from the resources that they have. And when they're winning in the country, they'll come into town and they'll spend money in town. There's been no government on the face of the planet that's ever developed any economy. Our country became the greatest economy in the world in short 200 years, not because of the government, but because of the people. The best thing that the state of Nebraska can do is to let the people keep more of their money, deregulate, and let you do what you're better than anybody else in the country at doing. You'll build an economy.
All right, same question for Tanya Storer. How do you plan to help shape rural Nebraska economic development? Examples were needing small-town grocery stores, housing, daycare, and people to facilitate programs and grants.
Absolutely. So I put 8,000 miles on a vehicle in 5 weeks, and I could almost hit repeat on every community's concerns, and it includes all of those things that you mentioned. And the number one thing that is key is the infrastructure, and it's broadband. It's 2024, and we have communities that still don't have access to high-speed internet. We absolutely have to have an audit done in terms of what those dollars that were granted out several years ago, why has that not been built out? So it's fundamental to bringing people back into our communities. You can build a multi-million-dollar business in Whitman, Nebraska if you have high-speed internet. Certainly, having a tax-friendly structure for business as well as a friendly regulatory structure. Oftentimes, government just needs to get out of your way. Again, we are built, this country was built on the idea of capitalism and being rewarded for your efforts. We want to do, we want to create, we want to think. And so it's as much about what government can help do as it is about government getting out of your way and letting you do. As I've traveled across the district, it has occurred to me, we don't have a Menards, we don't have a Starbucks, we only have one Walmart. But what we do have is family-owned, hometown, Main Street businesses that is supporting every community in the 43rd District, and we need to continue to support them.
New question, and we'll stay with Tanya Storer for first response on this one. Which legislative committees would you request and why?
Agriculture, education, and judicial. Agriculture is obvious. That's our industry here. That's the basis for the 43rd District. Education, because that's impacting all of our communities as well. It's also the key to our property tax problem and being able to be engaged in how that TIOSA formula is changed that creates a fairer, more support from the state for every student across the state, specifically in the 43rd District. So education is key. And judicial, because I've sat back and watched our judicial system become weaker and weaker and weaker, and penalties for criminals become less. We're turning criminals out on the street on PR bonds because we're afraid of an overcrowded prison. I would vote to build another prison. If we have to put more people in prison for punishment for their crimes, then let's build another prison. But weakening the judicial system and thinking that's an answer for financial relief from the state is the wrong answer. So we need reform in our judicial system. We need to attack the educational TIOSA formula to provide real meaningful property tax relief. And we have got to continue to advocate for agriculture because it is Nebraska's #1 industry.
Same question for Tony Tangwall. Which legislative committees would you request and why?
I wouldn't request any committee assignments. As a statesman, I would offer myself to the legislature and be willing to serve in any area that they ask me to serve. Sometimes we are upset with people because they're not broad enough in their thinking, and they think that because we come from the 43rd District that, well, he wants to be on the Ag Committee and that's all he's about. I'd be willing to serve this state in any capacity that they ask me to serve. I'd be willing to take an assignment on a committee that I don't know anything about because I'd be willing to spend the time to study and to learn. I may go to the legislature with core values that I believe that belong to me, but I don't go to the legislature with any preconceived ideas of how I want to do it. The state needs to be helped. They are known as state senators, and we would be willing to serve in any capacity that they ask us to do because that would be what a statesman would do.
New question, and Tony Tangwall will have the first shot at this one. Preservation of the Sandhills is very important to the voters in this district. What is your stance on projects that affect our ranch lands, such as our project, wind turbines, and oil pipelines?
I'm not a sandhiller. I'm a gumbo guy from the Pine Ridge. But the sandhills are a precious, precious thing. There's no place in the country like the sandhills, and they need to be protected. They need to be preserved. I'm not an environmentalist like CNN would describe an environmentalist, but I do believe that we as stewards of the earth, that we're called to take good care of the resources that we have. And so what I just talked to some people last night. I talked to people that literally have tears running down their cheeks when they talk to me about this R line that they're proposing to send across the Sandhills. And they talk to me about how their ranches will be split in half. And it's heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking. It's not right. People have your homes and your land should not be violated like that. And we would protect, we would stand for, and we're against wind energy. We're against the windmills in Cherry County. The last great place when the lights go out is in Cherry County. People come from all over the country to look at the stars in Cherry County. I don't think they want to look at any blinking red lights. I just don't think that works. And so we can do better than that.
All right, same question. I'll repeat it for Tanya Storer. Preservation of the sandhills is very important to the voters in this district. What is your stance on projects that affect our ranch lands, such as our project, wind turbines, and oil pipelines?
So 20 years ago when I started studying the global warming agenda, which is a globalist agenda, it's a top-down from the United Nations. It started with the IUCN and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Preservation was a term that was injected into our conversation to replace the term conservation, two very different meanings. Conservation is to use a natural resource in a responsible manner and leave it in a better condition than you found it. Preserve means to leave in an unchanged state. If you were to fence out an acre of ground and never touch it, it would still change. But the globalists want you to believe that preservation is the same as conservation, and it is not. It is a method of control from the international level. Property rights are the foundation to the United States of America. They are key. The house falls down if we start to ignore individual rights and property rights. So individuals are endowed with that responsibility. We are absolutely stewards of those resources and need to steward them responsible. But I don't want government, local, state, national, or international, dictating to me what I can or cannot do on my property. And leaving that into the hands of those individuals with reasonable regulations that protect the overall environment is the best approach.
New question, and we will stay with Tanya Storer for first response. Certain areas of the state have concerns with groundwater in both quality and quantity. What role does the state play in those areas?
So according to this law in the state of Nebraska, the state owns the water. Whether we like that or not, that is the state law. So we have an NRD system where you are electing individuals to represent you in terms of making those management decisions. It's a good system. It keeps the people connected to the decisions while working with the state and DNR. When it comes to water as an overall picture, we absolutely have got to get the canal built. That's not going to be in the 43rd district, but it's still a statewide issue. It was a compact that was drafted over 100 years ago, but the only way Nebraska gets our full allotment of water coming out of Colorado is if we build a canal. By not having the canal in place right now, we are giving it away. We're literally giving away our water allotment. And so every gallon that we are not bringing into Nebraska is another gallon of water that we're having to take out of the aquifer. So getting the canal built is going to be a big piece in water management, and that will affect everyone in this state, and continuing to support our NRD system.
Same question goes to Tony Tangwall now. Certain areas of the state have concerns with groundwater in both quality and quantity. What role does the state play in those areas?
Well, as Tanya has pointed out, the state of Nebraska says it owns the water. I've never really very comfortable with the state of Nebraska owning a whole lot of anything. The people of this state, I think, are very intelligent people. We run into problems when selfishness and greed steps in, and we need to make sure that your water usage is not shorting your neighbor. There's some of these things that they're a moral issue more than they're a legislative issue, and we've got to make sure that we protect the water. The water is a precious resource. Obviously, the Ogallala Aquifer is a wonderful thing. Where I live, we don't really set over the Ogallala Aquifer, and so water is an issue. And good, clean water to drink, but we also got to protect the right to use water for agricultural purposes, irrigation, cattle, things like that. It's very important. And so I would once again, I would just remind us as citizens that we need to make sure that we are continually at the forefront of reminding our government, state and federal, that it's we the people that matter. The most important thing that survives, whether it's in the state of Nebraska, is you and I as people.
For those that may have just walked in, again, if you have any questions that you would like to hear the stance of our candidates tonight, hold up your hand and we'll get you a note card. And then once you've filled out your question on that note card, hold it in the air, and one of our volunteers from the Nebraska Farm Bureau will be around to collect that from you. We will stay with Tony Tangwall for a response to this one. If elected, how are you going to stay connected to your district?
I told some folks the other day that there's no way that one person with a staff of 2 people can do the job. He's going to need about 40,000 people to help him. And we will build a infrastructure, if you want to call it that, of citizens. It's extremely important that people that represent us stay in close contact. So one of the things that I would implement would be a caucus of citizens. And that would be, we would have in each county that we represent, we would seek to build a network of people that are not just eyes and ears on the ground to just observe what's going on, but to consistently report to and bring and work with us. I know when our senators get down there, they get busy and they've got a lot of things pulling at them. But I would love to build an infrastructure that where you, the people, are on the phone with us. You're helping us do the work, because you couldn't do it by yourself. You could never do it correctly, and literally come to Lincoln and work with us. That's how it would get done, and we could be successful at that.
All right, well, that's the same question to Tanya Storer. If elected, how are you going to stay connected to your district?
It is a large district, and so certainly there's a sacrifice of time and commitment to stay connected, but it's vital to hear from the constituents out here in the 43rd District, and so I would do exactly what I've been doing for 5 or 6 weeks, and that's traveling to county commissioner meetings, to city council meetings, and being very intentional about having a presence in each county on a regular basis. In addition to that, I've already sort of done a little homework to see if this is even possible, but I think it would be very valuable to have one of those staff members that the legislature allows you to have to be out here in the 43rd District for constituent services. So there's more accessibility for the folks out here to be able to walk into an office or visit with somebody and put a face to the office. That's something that's never been done, but I've done a lot of things that I've asked a lot of questions that have never been done before. So that's another idea that I would have to try and stay more connected with the people out here in the 43rd District.
All right, a new question for our candidates. This will be for Tanya Storer to start. Foreign ownership of land and ag land is an important yet complex issue. What do you believe is the solution to balance private property rights, economic development, and national security?
Yeah, this is a very important issue, and I think one that we all need to be very tuned into. And at the end of the day, yes, you have the right to sell to whomever you wish, but the United States of America has identified enemies around the world. And I think it's completely appropriate that those countries that are identified enemies to the state of Nebraska not be allowed to purchase land in the state of Nebraska. You're letting the terrorist in the door, and that doesn't even make sense. The other issue on foreign ownership of land is a much more sort of sneaky, subversive way of doing it, but it's the recent issue of NACs, NACs, Natural Asset Companies, which the Securities and Exchange Commission a few months ago tried to sneak in some rulemaking that would have allowed foreign countries to buy, in essence, a whole other property right on land in the United States called ecological services. Thankfully, Senator Ricketts and Congressman Flood were on top of that. They made enough noise that they pulled the rulemaking, and it's went to bed for now. Senator Merman has proposed a bill to make NACs, Natural Asset Companies, illegal in the state of Nebraska, and I definitely support that.
All right, Mr. Tangwall, same question. Foreign ownership of land and ag land is an important yet complex issue. What do you believe is the solution to balance private property rights, economic development, and national security?
I believe that the state of Nebraska belongs to the citizens of the state of Nebraska. I'm not comfortable with any foreign ownership of any land in this state. I'm not even comfortable with foreign investment in our state because we can't track all the other, when a foreign investor is in, we don't know who they're dealing with, when we're not watching them. And as Tanya said, it is a national security issue, but I'm pretty bold in what I believe. I think the state of Nebraska belongs to the good citizens of the state of Nebraska. It's pretty simple, and we need to protect that. Your children need to be buying the land next door, or they need to be inheriting your land. My grandchildren need to be buying land and building their lives here. And I think that's I'd like to tell you something really profound about that, but that's just how it is. I'm against it.
Right, new question. Tony Tangwall. Are there any changes or efficiencies that you would support with our current brand law?
Brand law?
Yep, I'll repeat the question if you'd like. Are there any changes or efficiencies that you would support with our current brand law?
I am a brand guy. You better keep branding, what do they say, trust your neighbors, but brand your cattle. Where I live, the good fences are 3 wires, 2 of them are sagging, and half the staples are missing. It's not a question of whether you're going to get your neighbor's cattle or whether he's going to get yours someday. It's just a matter of when. And if we don't have brands in our part of the state, we're going to have gunfights. I'd prefer to have brands. And if we don't have any branding, what are you all going to do every weekend in the month of May anyway, right? So we need to keep branding our cattle. That's extremely important.
All right, same question to Tanya Storer. Are there any changes or efficiencies that you would support with our current brand law?
So I had the opportunity to serve for 2 years on the brand committee. I learned a lot while I was on the brand committee, but I would explain that this way, especially to the senators in Lincoln and Omaha that think it's just about a brand. The brand committee is in essence the law enforcement arm for the state of Nebraska, protecting our largest, most liquid natural asset, and that is cattle. You can't really steal a truckload of corn very easily, and it's not going to have the same value as a trailer load of calves. And so that anyone that is proposing or would propose that we eliminate completely the brand committee, I would come back at them and say, should we defund the state patrol too? Because it's the equivalent. It's the law enforcement arm of our largest natural or our largest cash commodity in this state. Does it need modernization? I think we have to be able to, every so many years, make sure that we are making any necessary changes needed to be made to keep up with industry changes as well. That needs to be put in the hands of the brand committee. They're appointed by the governor. They're not endorsed, but they're vetted through by the legislature, and that should be their responsibility to work with different segments of the industry, take a look at what are the various needs. We have all kinds of components, from the feedlot industry to the packing industry to the cow-calf ban, to sit down and make sure that we're serving each segment of the industry appropriately.
All right, we'll have a new question for our candidates. Tanya Storer, this will be for you first of all. As a state senator, you will need to build consensus with the majority of our other senators. How will you be able to work with other senators who may not agree with your point of view?
It is, as I've watched as how our society as a whole, and specifically if you watched even 10 minutes of the legislative debate on the floor last year, you would agree, we've sort of spiraled into this place where we're not allowed to disagree. If you would disagree with somebody on one issue, you're blackballed, you're set to the side, you're not allowed to speak to them. It's like being in junior high where, one little girl said, "Don't talk to her, you won't be my friend." It's ridiculous. We have to be adults. We have to have adults in the room. We have to be able to have civil discourse again in order to solve problems. My son, when he was in college, and it seems so simple, but he was a communications major. He goes, "Yeah, we were learning about dialogue today." I'm like, "Really? What's dialogue?" He goes, "Well, when you have a conversation with somebody for the purpose of exchanging information, not necessarily to change their mind." Well, that's a new concept, to just sit down and hear someone out. And so we've got to be better listeners. We've got to be better servants. And that doesn't mean we're going to agree at the end of the day, and that's okay. But maybe you can come back and work together on the next issue. But we have got to quit lobbing firebombs at each other and making enemies because we disagree on one issue. There's not enough of us. We've got to sit down and work out the problems and know that we may not win every battle, but we've got to keep coming to the table and behaving like adults.
Now, Tony Tangwall, as a state senator, you will need to build consensus with the majority of other senators. How will you be able to work with other senators who may not agree with your point of view?
There's some things that are not up for debate. I'll be honest with you. There's some things that I believe that are not up for debate. Maybe not with you, but with me. And so all I can tell you is that if you want me to represent you in Lincoln, I'll tell you what's not up for debate. If that's not a fair representation of you, that's fine. But there's just some things that are not open for debate when it comes to moral issues and things like that. We need to have the ability to listen to other people and not even respond back. Just let someone else tell us. But they've got to tell me the facts. They've got to tell me why they believe that. They've got to tell me, is that constitutional? Is it even true? And so there may be times that people will say, well, he just doesn't get along with everybody. Well, there's just going to probably be some issues like that. And I make no apology for that. But on the other hand, we need to be able to agree to disagree without being disagreeable. And what happened at the legislature last year with some individuals was frankly just a shame, and it really looked bad on all of us. And so we have the ability to agree to disagree without being disagreeable.
All right, another question for our candidates. Tony Tangwall, you'll have first shot at this one. What is the number one issue you would not change your personal conviction on, even if you knew it would cost you the election, and you knew your personal conviction differed from the 43rd District?
What is the number one issue? There's probably quite a few. You folks can smile every once in a while. You look really nervous out there. The right to life. The fact that we have got to stop with the foolishness, with what's going on with our children transitioning, and that's such a really polite term that describes a very grotesque thing that's going on in the country. You asked me for one, I just gave you two, and I'm sure Tanya has some. But there's just a couple things that we're not going to move off of. There's other things that we believe in, obviously, so the question's a little bit, vague, but we're just not going to move off of the fact that we're not going to allow we're not going to allow the minds of our children to be raped mentally. We're not going to stand for things like that. And we are going to protect the unborn. And those are just two of them, I guess. You asked for one, I gave you two.
Tanya Storer, I'll repeat the question. What is the number one issue you would not change your personal conviction, even if you knew it would cost you the election, and you knew your personal conviction differed from the 43rd District?
Absolutely, without hesitation, life. When I look at any candidate, whether it be federal or state, that's my first question. I'm a Christian, so I have very deep convictions based on my faith, that we have an obligation to protect life. Life is precious, whether it's 8 seconds old or it's 85 years old. Life is precious. We are all created by our Creator. But even if you're talking to someone who maybe doesn't have those same faith-based convictions, our Bill of Rights starts with the word life. The government has a fundamental responsibility to protect life. And the minute those cells unite and there's an electronic thing that happens, and shortly thereafter a heart starts beating, that's life. In this country, you can go to prison for destroying an eagle's egg, but it's okay to destroy human life. So, hands down, I would not budge on my moral convictions and the responsibility of government to protect life.
All right, new question for the candidates. Tanya Storer, what is your vision on future power generation and distribution in Nebraska that will allow for economic growth?
First and foremost, the state of Nebraska has an obligation to, regarding power, to look at reliability and affordability. Unfortunately, because of a lot of the globalist agendas and the global warming BS, we can't build a hydroelectric plant anymore. That's one of the most renewable, truly efficient forms of energy, and it's a shame that we're at a place in history that we can't do that. Coal is the next most reliable energy form in terms of cost, right, and reliability. When we're looking at that overall energy grid, if we lose the ability to deliver power at any place in this state, we're not just talking about households and human lives. I can light a kerosene lantern and probably at my house go get a bucket of water from the tank and flush my toilet, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of head of livestock, whether it be pork, beef, chickens. There is billions of dollars at risk when that grid goes down. So we have got to be able to put reliability first and cost effectiveness right there with it.
Tony Tangwell, same question. What is your vision on future power generation and distribution in Nebraska that will allow for economic growth?
Well, first of all, I'm not for anything that the only way that it survives is based on a subsidy. When you tell me we really have to have something, that tells me that there's a demand. Well, then, if something is in such high demand, it should be able to be supplied without a subsidy. And there's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of technology out there. And I'm not a scientist, and I don't play one on TV, but if you look into nuclear, there's some options out there with nuclear power. I know that those of us that were alive during the 70s, we all think about 3 Mile Island or later on Chernobyl, but I don't think that has to be the case. I'm not embarrassed to say that I'm fine with people in West Virginia digging coal. I'm fine with people in the Powder River digging coal. Coal trains roll through Crawford, Nebraska all day, every day, and the technology has cleaned up a lot of that industry. So, we've got a good power thing going right now. We need to stay with it and to look at some other things, nuclear being one of them. But when someone starts talking about things and the subsidies are the first thing that we have to do to subsidize it, a red flag goes up with me.
All right, we've had some great questions from the crowd. Thank you, everybody, for helping foster a great discussion with some thought-provoking subjects. It's last call for questions. We're going to ask a few more of our candidates, and then coming up at about 8 o'clock or so, we're going to kind of do a lightning round where it'll be yes, no, short responses. But we've got a few more detailed ones to ask you first. And we'll stay with Tony Tangwall. Do you support hard caps on local governments to control spending, schools, counties, etc.?
Do I support hard caps? Well, I think a hard cap, the very notion of a hard cap may be a little bit unrealistic, because I think if we've watched the economy in the last 2 years, we've seen a thing called inflation. And while I would be very much in support of, cutting spending and the old tightening the belt and all those things, to say that I would be in favor of a hard cap, I guess I'd tell you I would be in favor of a hard cap on diesel fuel being 90 cents a gallon, but it's not happening. So I think that's just a little bit unrealistic. Things move. Yeah, it'd be great if we could keep costs down, and we need to fight and strive to do that. But we've got to deal in the world we're dealing in, and so I think you're asking something there that may be a little unrealistic, but certainly need to continue to strive to be good stewards of the money that we have available to us.
All right, same question goes to Tanya Storr. Do you support hard caps on local governments to control spending, schools, counties, etc.?
Yes, I do. I support hard caps for this reason. I think there needs to be transparency with the taxpayers, and oftentimes whether it's a county or a school or an NRD has a year where it's a 5 or 6 or 10% increase in their tax ask, it happens often before the taxpayer even knows what happens. So I'm going to add to that a hard cap with the ability of the local voters to override that. And that provides for true transparency in government. There are certainly years that there's going to be ebbs and flows and increases in inflation, and that oftentimes is where your county's cash reserve can come in on a county level or school level to help sort of moderate those ebbs and flows and unexpected expenses. But it's not our schools necessarily in our counties. When I've looked around at the expenditures and the fiscal responsibility in the 43rd district, we're doing a pretty good job. But understand that it's a lot of the schools in the Lincoln and Omaha districts that are going over and above what you can even imagine in expenditures. And they're taking money out of the same pot that should be available to redistribute back out to our students. So hard caps doesn't mean people here are doing a bad job. It means we need to hold statewide accountability to provide for better distribution of those dollars across the state to our students as well.
All right, down to our last couple of questions before we get to the lightning round. Tanya Storr, you'll have first response to this. What is your opinion on the public having access to hunt on school land?
A quick response? I'm sorry. Is this just
No,
another-
this is a 90-second response.
Yeah, so that actually came up this year. Not even the Board of Educational Lands and Funds was for that. A hard no on that. And the reason is, when you lease that property, you have a property right in the lease. And so for the state to come in and say, no, here, we're going to take that one property right away from you, because currently, if it's your private property, one of your property rights is to allow people in or to keep them out. And if you're leasing that ground, you should have that same property right attached to that lease. You decide who you allow in and who you keep out.
Same question for Tony Tangwall. What's your opinion on the public having access to hunt on school land?
That should be up to the individual that's leasing the land. If he's leasing it and he wants to let you hunt, he should let you hunt. But we just can't. I agree with Tanya on that. It just, once they've leased it, they're controlling it and they're taking care of it, and they do have rights that go with that. So, but I would also, and I'm sure they still can, but if he wants to let people hunt, he should be able to let them hunt. So.
We will move on to another question. Again, this will be a 90-second response. And Tony Tangwall, you'll have the first crack at it. How will you promote rural economic development, and what challenges do you see as obstacles hindering economic development and growth?
Rural economic development. If you're old enough, you've heard every politician every 4 years for your whole life tell you about rural economic development, and they still haven't done it. I said it before, and I'll say it again. The people that I'm looking at in this room are the key to rural economic development. I would fight for the state to let you keep more of your money. If you had more of your money, there's things that you would like to do, but you don't have the money to do it. You've got ideas that you'd like to implement. You are the rural economic development. I would fight for you to have the right to farm and ranch, develop the economy that you have. If you don't farm and ranch, if you live in town, you have a business in town, I would fight for your right to have more of your money back so that you could develop an economy. You are the economy developers. I get passionate about this one thing, rural economic development, like somebody's going to do that for you. The state of Nebraska has been in the way. Most governments are in the way in terms of your economic development. There's enough brains in this room to light the whole world on fire. We got to deregulate and set the people free so that you can develop an economy. You are the best at it.
Same question for Tanya Storer. How will you promote rural economic development, and what challenges do you see as obstacles hindering economic development and growth?
Yeah, I would say there's not some magic wand that government waves and again creates. I think Tony said that well. The government doesn't create the economic development. The government can create the opportunities for economic development. And that starts with all of the things that I keep hearing across this district. Infrastructure is key. First of all, people are not going to move back to a community that doesn't have broadband. We live in 2024. They're not going to move back to a community that doesn't have a quality school system. They're not going to move back to a community that doesn't have a quality health care system. We have got to put an end to the emerging care deserts that are developing out here. People are not going to move back, to communities that don't have those basic access to services, including your roads as well. And so those are some of the areas, maybe the state in terms of broadband, infrastructure, providing equal funds for our students across the state so our students all have opportunities for education. Those provide the basis for you then to go do what you do best. And the other line, this has just always been frustrating for me too, Tony. Real economic development, when agriculture's making money, boy, you see kids move back. So doing things to advocate for agriculture, so that getting some of those regulations out of the way, making sure we have a tax-friendly structure, and turning ag loose, because boy, that's when our kids start coming back.
All right, last question before we go to the lightning round. So you'll have 90 seconds for this one, and we'll start with Tanya Storer. What are your views on using public money for private schools? Scholarships, vouchers, direct funding? You have 90 seconds on this one.
Views on using public money.
Using public money for private schools.
Right. So if it's it was once posed to me this way, so maybe this isn't the best example, but for folks that are on the SNAP program, for example, if the state or the federal government is providing funds for people that are in need, and it's public money for people to go buy food, they're not dictating to them that they can only go to Walmart. You can go use that wherever you choose. You have a choice, right? So we have a strong public school system in Nebraska. It's worked pretty well. That being said, I think the money should follow the student, not the institution. We're funding education to give students a quality education. Now, there's a difference between private versus a parochial school that has very, very limited curriculum maybe that they're going to teach versus charter schools that in today's age, other states that have charter schools, they call them classical education, and the irony of that is they're teaching reading, writing, math, and Latin. That's what most of us all learned, maybe not Latin, but we were focused on academic-based education when we were in grade school, and now we have to give a name to that, and it's called classical education. But at the end of the day, parents should have some measure of choice within reason to take the dollars, the public dollars, and not follow the student. We're going to have the same number of students to educate in this state, regardless of which direction we go. But I'm out of time.
And that's time. So we'll move on to Tony Tangwall. What are your views on using public money for private schools? Scholarships, vouchers, direct funding?
My first part of that answer is I've never really figured out where the public money came from other than the public. And so your money as a parent should follow your child as a student. Once again, there's no other part of our society where we operate any different. I don't pay the bill at the John Deere dealer and go down and get goods from the Case IH guy. This idea of public money, it's your money. It's your child and it's your student. And it should follow your student where he or she is going to get the best education that they can get.
All right, we're going to do a lightning round now. So these will be yes, no, for or against, or one or the other type questions. We will give you a little bit of time if you need to explain a sentence or two. Let's keep it under 30 seconds, though. Lightning round. Number one, and Tony Tang will start with you and then move right to Tanya Storr after that. Pro-life, pro-choice.
Pro-life.
Pro-life.
Death penalty. Tanya, we'll just go back the other way. You can go
I go
first,
first.
Tanya.
The death penalty, the people have spoken, the state of Nebraska, so yes, I support the death penalty.
For who?
Death penalty.
Oh, the death penalty for who?
For or against, yes or no?
Well, for murderers, yes. I'm pro-death penalty. The Bible said take a life. That's why God instituted government, is to protect human life.
All right, next one is, and we'll start with Tony and then move back this way, epic.
Epic? Yes.
I have concerns about the collection and distribution. So for the very simple referendum as it's written, it would absolutely take your ability away to support your local government. So in its current form, I cannot support that.
Next question, charter schools. Tanya, we'll start with you.
Nebraska is one of only 2 states in the nation that has no school choice option. So I think charter schools are a viable option for the state of Nebraska to take a look at, yes.
Tony?
I think the parents are the best judge of how to raise their children and to educate them. So whether that's a charter school, a public school, or a homeschool, or that's the children belong to God, but they've entrusted to parents. So
Perkins County Canal. For or against?
I didn't know Perkins County was in the 43rd district. So I'm not going to give you an answer on that. I'm here to represent the 43rd district.
Yes, I'm in favor of the Perkins Canal because it will benefit all water users in the state of Nebraska by getting our full allocation.
Okay. Tanya Storr first on this one. Second amendment.
Absolutely, I support the Second Amendment. We have the right to defend ourselves.
I don't support the Second Amendment. I live it. It needs to be lived. Absolutely. It's one of your God-given rights. We don't just support it, we promote it. And there's a slight difference there.
Starting with Tony Tangwall, Convention of States.
The idea of Convention of States, I understand that it's a constitutional thing. I do have one concern, that as I look at our leaders, I don't find many Washingtons, Jeffersons, or Madisons sitting around right now. And so, although I think it's certainly an option, and we would stand with that option, but I would be very careful to make sure that we've got the same brain power in the room that they had when they did it the first time.
Yeah, I would say I support it because it's part of our constitutional rights. So absolutely, I support our Constitution, therefore I would support that. I would have huge concerns about pushing to open up our Constitution in the current political environment we're in, because I think that there's a lot at risk in terms of what you may end up with, what you may want and what you may end up with. So support it because it's constitutional. Would I support pushing it today? I would have reservations about that.
And the final one before we move to the closing comments, I'm going to ask you about marriage. We will phrase it as marriage being between one man, one woman.
So
Yes, no, for, or against.
For or against marriage, or marriage between
Marriage
a man and a
between
woman?
one man, one woman.
The question's a little, I know where you're going with it,
Yeah.
but absolutely, as a Christian, God intended marriage to be between a man and a woman. People who choose a different lifestyle should absolutely be respected. As a Christian, we don't reject the sinner, we reject the sin. So we're to be kind and we're to be loving to all people. But from a legal standpoint, to protect that fundamental family unit, I could only support legal marriage between a man and a woman.
Same question.
I'm for marriage. I've been in it for 34 years, one man, one woman, so I don't know how else to tell you that. Our founders of our country also told us one thing that many people forget about, that they believed that the rights that they were to preserve for you were rights that fell in line with God and nature. This government does not have the right to secure a right for someone, our founding fathers said, that did not line up with God and nature. If it's unnatural, it's illegal.
All right, that concludes the lightning round. So we'll give each candidate 2 minutes for a closing message, and we will start the same way we began with Tanya Storer.
Again, thank you for coming. I know it's a sacrifice of time. I think this is so important, though, because we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So it's so important for voters to make informed choices. Just in closing, I will tell you that I am a constitutional conservative. I'm principled. I feel firm on those core principles that America was founded on. I get passionate when I talk about it. It is limited government. It is individual rights, which includes property rights. It is the keeping government out of your way and allowing people to go do what you do best. And we call it capitalism, and it's become a dirty word. We need to stop that. That's a trick being played on us from sort of Marxist tactics, I would tell you. Capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any other economic system in the history of the world. And we need to get America back on her feet. And we need to start helping provide people with those same opportunities that people risk their life to come to this country for. And again, part of that we can go do today, whether it's our local government or state government, is reining in out of control government, is being fiscally responsible, and remembering that government doesn't give you your rights. Government's role is to protect your rights. And we're getting that flipped around in recent years. So again, thank you. I appreciate your time. I will certainly be happy to visit with you afterwards, and have a good evening.
Closing comments from Tony Tangwell. You have 2 minutes.
Look forward to meeting with you this evening after we're done here and shaking your hand and looking into your eyes and have you tell me what is important to you. We all have stories. We all have scars. One of the biggest mistakes that we make in life is we judge people by their scars before we find out from them how they got them. We're all flawed people. We want something better for our children and for our grandchildren. One of the things that irks me about the political process is that it would seem that a lot of times people get into politics and they do it and they treat the people that they're trying to serve like they're beneath them. I want to tell you that the greatest resource that we have in this state is you folks. And we will seek to serve you in a manner not from above you, but as a peer. We want to represent you in a manner that would be fitting to the type of people that you are. And I'll leave you with this last thought. most of us in this room in 50 years will be dead. What type of legacy are we going to leave on this earth? What type of state are we going to leave for our children and for our grandchildren? If we don't make the right decisions now, and if we don't take a stand and begin to think things through and to stand up for what is right, our children will not have a legacy. The only reason I'm up here tonight is because I have 4 grandchildren, and I want them to live in a nation that is even remotely close to what our founding fathers intended for them to have. And that's what our heart's desire is to leave a legacy for these kids.
Thank you. Well, as we kind of bring our legislative forum to a close for the 43rd District, you've been a great crowd, and I know you've been sitting on your hands. Thank you for doing that. If you would, let's give both of our candidates a round of applause. And while you're putting your hands together, how about we show our appreciation to the Nebraska Farm Bureau for allowing this chance to discuss some important topics for our state and our district. We'd like to invite everybody to stick around for the reception that will follow. You'll have the opportunity to talk and visit individually with the candidates and ask your questions directly to them. Again, thank you for coming this evening and enjoy the reception.